A lot is being talked about military aid to Pakistan, and it has become controversial here. But we should keep in mind that we have 150,000 troops which have been fighting this war for almost a decade, and wars cost money, and that military aid was meant to support Pakistan Army to enable it to fight this war. And even if we believe the figures coming from the United States, that $12 billion went into the military aid in the last 10 years, $100 billion a year is spent on Afghanistan, and they have about 142,000 soldiers. So as far as the United States is concerned, Pakistan is doing a great job.
All right. That's why I want to ask you about the spent plan 2011.
Since you mentioned
yeah, Ayesha, go
Waqas,
ahead.
if you have a minute, I want to ask Senator Khan one question. Since you mentioned military aid, I want to ask you, in a country where your tax to GDP ratio is less than 9%, where your foreign minister pays only 8,000 rupees or less than $100 in taxes, most of your recent prime ministers have had debts written off, where you don't generate agricultural income because most of your parliamentarians are landed elites, does a country like Pakistan, which has potential to generate a lot more money and doesn't even have a right to ask anyone else for aid?
Yeah, if a tax to GDP ratio is down, that doesn't mean that Pakistan cannot fight wars and Pakistan cannot build dams and our economy should go down. Yes, we have a problem in tax to GDP ratio. Yes, our politicians do not pay the taxes they should, but that is the major debate that has been going on for a year and a half. They are hiding behind agriculture income, and agriculture income is a very sensitive topic in this country. It represents 25% of the GDP, and it is not taxed, and that is why our tax to GDP ratio is so low. If you bring that income into the tax net, and if you bring the services sector, we will be there. That's a political decision that sooner or later some government will have to take. I agree with you that we have to do, but that doesn't mean that countries should start punishing us because we have not been able to reach that tax to GDP ratio, which exists in the West.
And in line with what you're saying, Senator Khan, even the United States has now started looking at the civilian effort as a separate thing from the military assistance that it gives. I wanted to ask you about the spent plan 2011. Many in Pakistan are now looking at the spent plan as a litmus test of the assurance that the United States is giving to Pakistan for its civilian effort. But remember now, there's been a stash of $200 million in that, and it is now at 1.3 billion, and now that spend plan lies before the Conference Committee of Congress. How do you look at this?
See, the problem is here, because of a free press, people have become very knowledgeable about what is happening in the world, what is happening in Pakistan. What they say is that when a commitment is made from Pakistan military and that commitment is challenged in the parliament, the United States tries to bulldoze that and puts parliament on the side, does not really bother that much about it, and the army finally does what it wants to do. When it comes to their commitment, then everything is subject to Congress, which is fine. I can understand that. I've lived in that country and I appreciate that and admire that country for that reason. But they should accept that we have democracy also now. If the parliament, which represents the people of Pakistan, are against something and they are passing resolutions, then they cannot bulldoze the military to follow their dictates.
We will carry forward the discussion, Senator Khan, once we return from this break. After a couple of minutes, do stay with the platform.
Welcome back to the platform, which you're watching live from Washington, D.C. and Islamabad. We're talking about Pakistan's financial development and who is really responsible for it, national leadership or international aid agencies. We have with us Mr. Shamsul Mulk on phone, and I want to ask you, Mr. Mulk, Senator Khan was saying before we went to the break that Pakistan's fighting a war and the U.S. Congress and other countries should not punish Pakistani people for whatever their security concerns are. My question is there a lack of credibility with Pakistan's democratic government? Because the 2010 floods, the foreign minister came here and gave estimates of $43 billion. Nobody believed him. It later turned out to be estimates were $10 billion. So is security the only issue, or is there another issue why aid is not being dispersed to Pakistan?
Well, if you want me to just generalize the whole problem, the problem is that actually you put up a question in between somewhere where you said, do we have the right to seek assistance from the international community in such areas where there is lack of leadership, which is local leadership. And I entirely agree that we don't have the right really to go along to the international communities begging them to give us aid when the problem essentially arises from our lack of leadership. But let me tell you, the sufferings of Pakistan right now under the current condition is attributable totally to the war in Afghanistan. And the war in Afghanistan is not of Pakistan's making. Now, there are estimates, and I've been actually for a while the caretaker chief minister of the Northwest Frontier province at that moment. And I could understand that that province was taking the brunt of all this problem which was taking place as a consequence of the war in Afghanistan. There are problems within Pakistan, no doubt. This is a problem which Senator Khan said we have to resolve among ourselves. But that does not give us the freedom to really go along and tell other people to do our job. We should do our job well and properly. I entirely agree with you that question of our resources, it can be
Thank you, Mr. Mulk, for your comment, and I will bring this back to you, Mr. Cutherell. Even though we're talking about security circumventing the need for aid, you just heard our guest said the problems in Pakistan are based in Afghanistan. What I want to ask you is, when the U.S. understands all these problems and the lack of credibility of the government, why isn't it doing what China is doing in Pakistan, which is they go in, they build dams, they build schools, they build roads, they build infrastructure, they circumvent all this credibility thing. They just go in there and do the job, and the people of Pakistan can see it. Can the U.S. not do it?
That's a good question. I don't think that's been how the U.S. has ever done development aid. I think they're probably not about to start now. As for why, I think it has to do with the fact that the U.S. generally wants to invest not just in, say, the dam or the school or whatever it is, but to invest in the sort of institutions around that. At least I believe that's the kind of that's the argument that would be made on behalf of the administration.
Now, go ahead. Go ahead, Waqas.
I wanted to bring Senator Khan on the gas pipeline issue, Senator Khan. And Mr. Shamsul Mulk also pointed out that there is, of course, a lack of proper leadership. But in this case, do you think that lack of leadership is again the problem when Pakistan is under threat of sanctions from the U.S. if it goes forward with the Iran-Pakistan gas pipeline? And you know that could start generating by 2014. And then there's the Turkmenistan-Afghanistan pipeline. And probably the problem again lies in Afghanistan when it comes for Pakistan to decide over the two projects.
Because as far as the lack of leadership is concerned, that's for us to solve. Okay, this is the process of democracy. The people of Pakistan brought in this government. I sit in opposition. I oppose this government, and I think there are a lot of things they've done badly. But we will take care of that. The people of Pakistan in the next election will take care of that. But United States deals with Pakistan. United States does not deal with Prime Minister Gilani or President Zardari. It deals with Pakistan. It's dealing with the people of Pakistan, which are currently being represented by a leadership which has become very controversial. As far as the Iran-Pakistan pipeline is concerned, I can understand the concerns that the United States has. But that's a done deal. It has been signed, sealed, and delivered, and a lot of work has started on that. How can they expect us to back out of that thing? It's going to provide us close to 1 billion cubic feet per day of natural gas. Right now we have a deficit about 1.5 billion cubic feet per day, which is going to go to 4 to 5 billion cubic feet per day in 4 to 5 years. They should have come on the table or talked to us when we were in the negotiating stage, as they spoke to India. that was the time to talk to us, because how are we going to sell to the people of Pakistan that because there is a concern about that pipeline from the United States, that's why we are backed out of the deal? You think that any government would be able to deliver that in this country? No. Yes, if there was some option on the side that this energy need is going to be compensated for by this and that, and that also before a contract was signed. Would United States get out of a contract, signed, sealed and deliver? Right. What would be their credibility if they do that?
Right, interesting indeed. Let's ask Mr. Shamsul Mulk about that. I'm wondering, Mr. Mulk, what would it take to convince Pakistan? You heard what Senator Khan said. What do you think would it take to convince Pakistan to move away from the Iran-Pakistan gas pipeline and go for the Turkmenistan one?
You know, Iran-Pakistan pipeline is something which is in hand. The other pipeline is expected to come along, nobody knows when. And that many things depend upon what is the condition in Afghanistan. And Pakistan, you know a time when the people are out into the streets. And Pakistan can just afford to go and say that good enough, this we don't build, we have signed an agreement, we have done everything, we could have got it in another 3 years or so. But since our friend America doesn't want us to do, has America done things which Pakistan wanted it to do?